We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Vavam and Beis and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 66b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was dealing with the case in the Mishnah where the lender says to the borrower, if you don't pay me back the money within 3 years, then this property that I took as a collateral, I'm going to become the owner of this property. And the case is that the property is worth more than the actual loan, than the amount of money. And so it's an issue because it's really an asmachta. And if you hold asmachta lo kanya, if you hold that an asmachta is not able to create a kinyan, how is it that the lender is able to acquire the property in this case? And the Gemara now answers with a second answer. If you want, I could say a second answer. The case in the Mishnah is, it's not simply that the lender says, I'm going to acquire the property if you don't pay me back in 3 years. What he's actually saying is that retroactively, the giving of this money is going to be a purchase of the property. Now, in that situation, when he says that from this point in time, from right now, when I'm giving you the money, if you don't pay me back, then we're going to say that this money was essentially the money being used to purchase the property, and I'm acquiring it retroactively, I'm acquiring it from right now. That would not be a problem of an asmachta. Rashi says, in our Mishnah, the cases where he said retroactively, meaning imlo etein aloch ad shalosh shanim delav asmachti, meaning he says to him that if I don't give it within 3 years, so then it's going to be retroactively. The buyer says, if I don't pay within 3 years retroactively, I'm essentially selling you this property. That's not an asmachta. Ela kinyan gomri, that's just a regular kinyan. It's a full kinyan. Shal manas mecher gomer hichzik b'meyachshav. Essentially, the lender is really making a chazak on the property. He's acquiring the property right now. Now, there's a condition that's attached to the acquisition, but it is a full kinyan he's making right now. B'damim halalu, with the money that he's giving to the borrower, he's essentially like a lokeach, and the borrower is essentially like a seller. Va'ozla ozla gabe, and the case over here is that the person who's selling the property, or the borrower who's selling the property, is really just selling it to him at a discounted rate, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the lender accepts that if the borrower gives back the money within 3 years, he'll accept the money and then he'll give back the property. And now what about the produce? In terms of the produce, when it comes to the produce, Reb Yehuda lokeach ochlan. According to Reb Yehuda, it's the lokeach that will be able to have the produce, meaning to say, the lokeach in this situation is essentially the lender. The lender will be able to keep the produce because it's tzad echad beribis. It's only going to turn into interest if one scenario unfolds. Again, if the scenario unfolds that he doesn't become the owner of the property, but rather it turns into a loan, so then it would be ribis, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, tzad echad beribis is fine. So then the lokeach, in this case, the lokeach again is the lender, would be allowed to have the produce. Well, the Rabbanan, now according to the Rabbanan who say tzad echad beribis is a problem, so then mishal shenosan, so then you'll just put the produce in the hands of a third party. That way no one will have the produce and you won't have a problem of ribis. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Mar Yenuko Mar Kashisha b'nei Rav Chisda Rav Ashi, Mar Yenuka and Mar Kashisha, the sons of Rav Chisda. They said to Rav Ashi, Hachi Amar Nahardoi Mishmei Rav Nachman. This is what they say in Nahardoi in the name of Rav Nachman. Hay asmachta, that when it comes to an asmachta, bezimnei kanya, in its time it is a good kinyan. Below zimnei, but if it's not in its time, lo kanya, it's not a good kinyan. Rashi explains bezimnei kanya kasal kadaitach. Right now we think this means higiaz man v'lo nasal lamosav, that if the time comes and he doesn't give him the money, so then we're going to say bezimnei, in that time it's going to be a kinyan. But below zimnei, meaning kodem shehigia, before the time comes, let's say it's before the time that the borrower is supposed to return the money, so then it's not going to be a kinyan. That's what we think the statement means right now. And so the Gemara continues, Amar lahu, so he said back to them, Kol midi, isn't that true by anything? Bezimnei kani, below zimnei, lo kani, at the proper time the kinyan takes place. If it's not yet the proper time, the kinyan won't take place. And so the Gemara continues, Dilma hachi kamri, so maybe what you meant to say was as follows. Ashkeche bego zimnei, let's say the lova finds the malva before the time that he actually has to pay up the money. V'yamar lein, he says to the malva kni, he says, forget it, I'm not going to pay you back, you can acquire the property. So then the property will be acquired. However, Basar Zimnei, let's say it's after the time that really the lova has to pay back. V'yamar le'kani, and the lova says to the malva, forget it, I can't pay you back, you should just acquire the property. So lo kani, so there it's not going to be a good kinyan. My time, what's the reason? Machmas kisufahu deka'amar le, because he's just saying it because he's ashamed, because the deadline has come, he doesn't have the money, and so he's just essentially like giving up and saying you can have the property, but that is not really going to be a good kinyan, because again, it's a situation of an asmachta. And Rashi explains, Ashkeche lova bego zimnei, if the lova lova finds him before the time, v'yamar lekani, he says you could acquire lo efdena ode, meaning I'm not going to redeem it anymore. So then kani, so then it's a good kinyan. De gomer v'yakni, he's certainly giving it away. De lo lama le lememar le, because if not, what does he have to say anything for? Halo ein yachol achshav l'tov. We can't claim it from him yet. It's still too early. So therefore, he's genuinely giving it away. But baser zimne, maybe you mean to say that he's not actually giving it away. But the Gemara continues velohi, but really this is not true. The afilu begos zimne. Let's say it's even before the time that the lova owes the money. Nami lo kani. It's also not going to be a kinyan, even if he says kani at that time. V'hai dekamar le kani, and the only reason he's saying kani is kasavar, because he's thinking to himself, kimati zimne lo lesi litra, done this way when the time actually does come, then I don't have to bother, I don't have to say that I don't have the money, so maybe he's embarrassed, even though it's before the time. Rashi says, lo lesi litra done v'litchia bi'alma mishum kisuf. Again, he's just saying it because he's ashamed. It could be that's what's happening, so it's not going to be a kinyan, even in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Papa says, Hay asmachta, when it comes to an asmachta, zimnin kanya v'zimnin lo kanya, sometimes it's a good kinyan, and sometimes it's not. And the Gemara explains, Ashkechei de kashasi shechar, for example, if the malva comes to collect from the lova, and he finds the lova is drinking beer, he's relaxed, so then we can assume it's an acquisition, we can assume that the lova has given up in terms of redeeming the field, and the field goes to the malva. Now, if he finds that the lova is searching for money, so then lo kani, so then it's not a kinyan, because it's clear the lova really is trying to get the money in order to get the field back. And Rashi explains, Ashkechei biyom hazman, if he finds him on the day that the loan is due, the shasi shechar, that he's drinking beer bechanus in the store, ein ze otzev lachzar achar pidyon sadeyu. He's not really thinking that he wants to try to redeem the field, v'dai to l'shaka. Therefore, again, we can assume that he really does mean to say that the malva can keep the field. But again, if he finds that he's searching for money, so then it's not going to be a kinyan. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Acha mi difti le Ravina. Rav Acha from Difti said to Ravina, Dilma lefechuche pachte kashasi. Well, maybe he's drinking because really he is in dire financial straits, and he's drinking just to calm himself. And so therefore, in this situation, we should say that the asmachta is not kona, because he's really in a bad financial situation, and he really doesn't want to give up the property. Inami, or we could say, inishachrina asmache azuze. Maybe there's somebody else that's supporting him with some money, meaning he has money and he's drinking, but it's not really that he has money. Somebody just gave him some money, essentially like a kind of a loan, and so therefore, again, really he does seek to redeem the property. And so therefore the Gemara says, Alama Ravina, rather Ravina says, Ikopid bidmei, if you find that the borrower is still very makbid in terms of selling his objects that he wants to get full market value, so then it's clear that he's not in a precarious financial situation, so then vadai kani. So then we say, certainly it is going to be a good kinyan, this asmacht is a good kinyan, because it is clear that he's not in a precarious financial situation. But the Gemara continues still, Amar le Rav Acha mi difti le Ravina, Rav Acha from Difti said to Ravina, Dil mosavar kihechi de lo titzalare. Maybe the reason why he's being careful to sell things at market value is because if everybody realizes he's selling everything for nothing, then all of his land is going to go down in value. So that's not a proof either. He still, again, might be in a precarious financial situation, and it should not be a good kinyan, this asmachta. And so the Gemara says, Elamar Papa, rather Papa says, Ikopid bi'ara vadai kani. If he's careful when he sells land, so then certainly in such a situation, he's not in a precarious financial situation, and we say that it is a good kinyan. And so the Gemara continues, Elamar Papa, rather Papa says, he kopid bi'ara, if he's strict not to sell land at all, he's keeping all of his land, so then we know he's not in a precarious situation, vadai kani, so then again this asmachta is certainly going to be kona. And Rashi explains, Lifchuche pachte, again, maybe he's drinking lahafik da'agaso, it's to calm his worries. Shadoeg alamos, maybe he's worried about money. It says that the wine can make a person happy, and so therefore if he's drinking for that reason, again, maybe we should say the asmacht is not kona. And Rashi continues, Ikopid bidimei, if he's careful in terms of getting market value, meaning in makvid b'mechiras chafotzav, if he's careful when he sells his stuff, shelo livchos mishavin, that he doesn't want to sell it below market value, then it shows he's not pressed for money. Vadai kona, then it's a kinyan, eno chashim tishkas sadeh, he's not concerned if his field goes to the lender. And so then the Gemara said, well, maybe no, maybe the lo titzalari, maybe he's just careful not to sell his products below market value because he doesn't want his land to go down in value. Shem yiro so mechazer achar mos, if everyone sees that he's trying to get money, u'mocher nechasav b'pachos, and he's selling his property at less than value, mozel karkosav, then all of his land goes down in value. Uliolam anasuvalo gamar makni, and really maybe he is in a coerced situation, and it's not really a good kinyan. And so then finally the Gemara said, kapid biyara shelo yimchar shum karka, if you see that he's not selling any property, afilu b'shavyav, he's not even selling land at its actual value, so then you see he doesn't really need money, he's not in a pressed situation, and you can assume the kinyan of the asmachta is in fact a good kinyan. And the Gemara continues, V'yomer Rav Papa, and Rav Papa says, Afagav de'omer Rabbanan asmachta lo kanyo, even though the Rabbanan say that asmachta is not kona, meaning again, if the borrower says that if I don't pay up, then you'll be able to keep the land, that is not going to be considered a good kinyan. Again, talking about a situation where the land is worth much more than the debt. Even though they say that's not a kinyan, apoteki hava lemigva mino, it's still considered to be an apoteki that the lender will collect specifically from this property up to the value of the debt that is owed. An apoteki, again, is a situation where the borrower designates a particular item or a particular piece of land that you're going to collect the debt that I owe from this particular item, from this land. So Rapapa is saying, even though it's not kona and it's an asmachta, the lender doesn't get all of the property, but he will collect from the property to the amount of the debt. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Rav Huna Breder Rav Nasan Rapapa, Rav Huna the son of Rav Nasan said to Rapapa, does it really work as an apoteki? Miko Amarle Kani L'Gavaina, did he say that you're going to acquire in order for the purpose of collection? He never said that. Why should that work? And the Gemara continues, Amarle Marzutra Breder Rav Mari L'Ravina. Marzutra the son of Rav Mari said to Ravina, V'yamar Kani L'Migva Minei Kani, if you're going to say that, let's say he does say that language, that you're going to acquire in order to collect from this, that it's an apoteki, and you're going to say that that should work as a kinyan, sof asmachti, it's still an asmachta. The asmachta lo kanya, it still shouldn't work, even if you had that language. An asmachta is not an effective kinyan, so why should it work? And so therefore the Gemara says, Ala apoteki d'kamar Rav Papa mahi. So rather, when Rav Papa said that it could work as an apoteki, what is the language that has to be used? The language is the Amar Le, that he says to him, Lo yehelach piron elamizu, that when I pay up this debt, the payment will be from this property. That would work as an apoteki. If you say it in the language of an asmachta, it will not be effective. And Rashi explains, Lemigva minei, he can collect from the property corresponding to the value of the debt. Konabuk, Keneged Mos, will acquire the property corresponding to the amount of money that he lent. V'imbolif roa hamos la'achar zman lo yikavlim. And the idea is that if he wants to pay money instead, after some time he won't accept it. He'll take the property instead. That'll be essentially the first source of collection. But the Gemara said, sof asmachti, but that's still an asmachta. Why should that be true? To lo amar le koni legavaina, he didn't say you're acquiring to collect. Elim eini nosein what he said was that if I don't pay you from now until 3 years, but that's really an asmachta, and that's not a good kinyan, so why should it work as an apoteki? And the Gemara says, you're right, if it's phrased in that fashion, it's not an apoteki. Rather, what is the apoteki of Rav Papa? The gabe asmachta to have a apoteki, that again, it would be considered an apoteki. That's if he says the language of, the payment will be from this, meaning what it means is, even if within 3 years the borrower is paying, he's going to pay from this property. If I don't give you from this property corresponding to the amount of money that you lent within the 3 years, then it's all going to be yours. So in that situation, with that phrasing, in that case Rav Papa would say, even though he's not going to acquire all of the property after 3 years, because that part is an asmachta, and asmachta is not a good kinyan. But apoteki hava lemikva minei, it is going to be an apoteki. Develav asmachta nami shavi apoteki, because when it's phrased in that fashion, even when we disregard the asmachta part, it is an apoteki, and it will work in that fashion. And the Gemara continues, there was a person who sold property to his friend, and he took responsibility for the sale, meaning to say that the seller said to the buyer, if my creditors take away the property from you, then I will reimburse you. Amar Le, so the buyer said to the seller, if they take the property from me, will you give me from your idei idius, the very best land that you have? Amar Le, so the seller said to the buyer, I'm not going to give you from the idei idius, I want to keep that land for myself, but I'll give you from other idius, from other superior quality land that I have, the isli that I have, that I will give you. I'll give you the idius, I won't give you the idei idius. In the end, the land was taken away from the buyer, and also bidka shakel idei idius, and then a river came and it flooded the idei idius, so that was no longer a good piece of property. Savar a papa lemeimer, a papa thought to say, me idius amar lev hakaima. He said he would give idius, he still has idius, he doesn't doesn't have idei idyus, but he still has idyus, he should have to give that to the buyer. Amar le Ravacha mi difti le Ravina. Ravacha from Difti said to Ravina, V'lei malei, but why can't he say to him, meaning why can't the seller say to the buyer, Ki amri loch ano magvina loch dahavi idei idyus kaima. When I said that I would give you the idyus, that's when the idei idyus was around. But hashta kaima le idyus b'makom idei idyus. But now the idyus is in the place of the idei idyus, meaning I don't want to give you idyus anymore. Now I just want to give you the beinonus. I want to give you the average property because I no longer have that very superior quality land. And the Gemara continues, Rav Bar Shava have a Masechet be Rav Kahana Zuzi. Rav Bar Shava owed money to Rav Kahana. Amar Lei said to him, Ilo parana loch liyom ploni gavi mehai chamri. He said, if I don't pay you by a certain date, so then you can collect from this particular wine. Savar Papa Lememar, Papa thought to say, Ki amrinan asmachta lokanya, when we say that asmachta is not effective, and this should be considered like an asmachta, but that's hani mili biara, that's only by land, the lav lezavune kaima, land is not something that is meant to be sold. Aval chamra, but when it comes to wine, kevan de lezavune koi, since it's meant to be sold, so kizuze dami, so it's just like money itself, and so therefore in this situation, when he says that if I don't pay you by a certain date, you'll collect from the wine, that is an effective statement, and the person collects the wine. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua Rav Papa, Rav Huna the son of Rav Yoshua said to Rav Papa, Hachi Amrinan Mishmei de Rabba, this is what they say in the name of Rabba, Kol a Di'i lo kani. Anytime you have a Di'i, you have something conditional like this, it's not a good kinyan, even by wine, this will not be effective. And the Gemara continues, Amar of Nachman says, Hashta do Amar Rabbanan Asmachta lo kanya. Now that the Rabbanan say that an Asmachta is not Kona, Hadarara v'hadri piri. If the lender takes that property as an Asmachta, he has to return the property and he has to return the produce from that property as well. The Gemara says, Lamemer, does that mean to say the Savar of Nachman Mechila Betos Lahava Mechila, that let's say the borrower now forgave it over to the lender by mistake, that's not a good Mechila? Voyitmar, but it was stated, Hamocher Peros Dekel Lechaver, if somebody sells the fruits from a palm tree to his friend, Amar Rav Huna says, Ad Shalo Bo Liolam, before they come into the world, Yachol Achzer Bo, he can retract. But Misha Bo Liolam, but once they come into the world, Ein Yachol Achzer Bo, he's not able to retract. For Rav Nachman, Amar, and Rav Nachman says, Af Misha Bo Liolam, Yachol Achzer Bo, even when they come into the world, he is able to retract. V'yomer Rav Nachman, and then Rav Nachman further says, Modina, I admit, the shamit v'yachal, that if he actually consumes the peiros, so lo mafkinan minei, we don't take it away from him. And apparently that shows that mechila betos, if he forgave it by mistake, it is considered to be a good forgiveness. And the Gemara answers and makes a distinction. Hasam over there, zavine, it's talking about a sale, but hacha, but over here, halva, it's a loan, so it's different. And Rashi explains mechila betos, if somebody forgives it by mistake, like in this situation, the hamocher savar shiknuya lelokech, the mocher thinks that the lokech really did make a kinyan. Again, in this situation, the lokech is actually the lender, and he said again that if you don't pay me back, so then I'm going to acquire this property. That's what the lender said to the borrower. That's what the lokech said to the mocher, and really that's not effective. But the mocher thinks it is effective. Umin hadin ochel peros. The mocher thinks that really the lokech did acquire the property, and he's really entitled to the produce. Umochel alachilaso, and therefore he forgives the fact that he took the peros. That's a situation of mechila betos, and it seems like Rav Nachman is saying mechila betos is not mechila, and that's why the lender, the buyer, essentially has to return the peros. But we find that Rav Nachman seems to say that mechila betos is a good mechila when it comes to the peros dekel. The case of the peros dekel, Rashi continues, mocher peros dekel kodem shechantu perosav. A person sells the fruits from a palm tree before those fruits have actually grown. Ad shelo bo liolam yachol lachzer bo. Now, if the fruits have not yet grown, you can retract the sale. In bo lachzer bo kodem shechantu perosav, if the person wants to retract before the fruits actually grow, chozer, he's allowed to retract. Afilu l'man damar adam makna davar shelo bo liolam. Even according to the one who says that this is a good sale, it's a good kinyan in general, because a person is allowed to be makna something that doesn't exist. But hani mili sheba lachzer achar sheba liolam. That's talking about if the person wants to retract after the fruits come into existence. But mishabo liolam eno yachal achzer. But once they come into existence, at that point in time, you're not able to retract. You can retract before they come into existence, but once they come into existence, he can't retract. To kasavar adam makna davar shelo bo liolam, because this because this opinion holds, meaning Rav Huna holds, that a person is able to be makna something that doesn't yet exist. That the sale should be chal once the fruits actually do come into existence. Again, that's Rav Huna's opinion. Rav Huna says before they come into existence, you can retract on the sale. Once they come into existence, you cannot retract. But Rav Nachman says even once they come into existence, you're able to retract. Af mishabo de'ena the makna davar shelo bo li'olam, because Rav Nachman holds you're not able to be makna something that doesn't yet exist, and therefore the whole kinyan is nothing. But then Rav Nachman said that I admit that if the person actually did take the produce, lo mafkinan minei, we're not going to take it away from him. Sharei kol zman shelo chazar mochal al achila. So as long as he has not retracted, he's essentially forgiving anything that is consumed. V'afal bisha betos. Now, even though the entire forgiveness is a mistake, shelo haya yodeya sheyuchal lach, so he didn't know that he's able to retract, mechilahi, it's still considered to be a forgiveness. And so here it seems like mechila betos is forgiveness. It's a contradiction within Rav Nachman. And the Gemara answered there's a difference between a sale and a halva. Hacha halvahi, over here, it really is a loan. It's not really a purchase. In this case, the lender, it was a situation where, again, the lender lent money to the borrower, and the borrower said, if I don't pay you back by a certain time, so then you can keep the property. So that's really primarily a loan. And so in such a situation, umichzi karibis, it would already look like ribis. It would look like a situation of interest if we allowed him to keep the produce. Shemitchila b'halva bolo, because originally this came as a loan. Uchribis kitzutza dami, it's like fixed ribis. V'ein avak ribis b'dvar halva. You don't have avak ribis, something that's a hint of ribis by a loan. Ela b'dvar mecher, that's only by a sale. Kagon hamarbe b'peiros to masnisim, like the case of marbe b'peiros in our Mishnah. And so again, therefore, in this situation where it really started out as a loan, so there Rav Nachman is going to say, even though in general Rav Nachman says that mechila betos is considered to be a mechila, but over here he would not allow that because it looks like ribis. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Zayin Amud Aleph.